Exploring the prospect of our first encounter with extraterrestrial life is a captivating endeavor. In this episode, guest Seth Shostak, an accomplished astronomer and author who presently serves as the senior astronomer at the renowned SETI Institute. Together, we delve into the intriguing questions surrounding what first contact with ET might sound or look like. Additionally, Seth will share his academic insights, touching upon the intriguing claims made by whistleblower David Grusch and NASA's recent engagement in the study of UFOs. Seth and I discuss the possibilities and implications of contact with intelligent beings beyond our planet. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Seth, thank you so much for joining me on Rebelliously Curious today. It is wonderful to have you here.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, Chrissy.
You are the senior astronomer at the SETI Institute. A lot of people know your work. You're quoted throughout all different media. You've done tons of interviews and TV shows. Before we get into a conversation around maybe contact with ET, what's going on with NASA and your perspective, UFO perspective around that, can you just tell me what sparked your curiosity around the UFO subject?
Well, I think it just derives from my interest in the whole idea of life beyond Earth. Look, as a kid, every weekend I went to the movies, usually to see these cheesy sci-fi films that they were making at the time. And they normally involved aliens who had the audacity to come to Earth and usually cause a lot of trouble.
So it's just film. There's nothing else that in pop culture or anything else that sparked your interest?
Well, the films were probably the most, the most important in terms of influencing my interests. But also, of course, television. We had a television in our house very early. 1948, we had a television, believe it or not. They were the only ones on the block with a television, I think. I suddenly developed a lot of friends. But, I was also interested in astronomy and the science. And, I would go to the planetarium and stuff like that.
So I imagine that your perspective on the UAP subject, along with working at SETI, has changed and evolved and grown over the years. Can you start me with what that evolution looked like when you became interested in UFOs and even just astronomy to where you are now and how that evolved?
Well, again, my interest in UFOs derives from my interest in astronomy and the question of life in space. And when I was a student, a fairly young student, I think when I was 12 or 13 years old, there were some books that came out. There was one by George Adamski in which he included photographs of alien spacecraft. And, gosh, I thought, my God, not only are the aliens out there, but they're visiting Earth. Although I was very suspicious of the photos even at the time, as many people were. In fact, I thought that the photos weren't as good as what I thought I could make in my own garage. And I did make some in my own garage, actually.
That's amazing. I actually would love to see those. If you do have some, send them over and I'll clip them into the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. I'll see if I can find them. They've appeared on the covers of magazines and stuff like that. But, a lot of people mistake them for being the real thing, not just a hubcap in somebody's garage.
Right. Fair enough. Billy Myers, maybe some people would agree or not, right, with those photos being real or not. But also, then the beginning of Pulp Fiction magazines. That was a huge part of that and the contribution to what a UFO looks like. And this is way before Kenneth Arnold. That saucer shape is actually an illustration first. So we've seen tons of designs and designers take the UFO topic and really create what the pop culture image looks like for us today.
Indeed.
Yeah. So looking from a NASA perspective right now, they're interested. Well, they've always kind of been interested in this topic per se, maybe not UFOs, but of extraterrestrial life potentially. What's your thoughts right now on the NASA research paper and research that they're doing? What's your thoughts from a SETI perspective? Are they doing it properly? Are they putting best practices in place, and are there other best practices they could be doing from your perspective?
Well, I think all this derives from the kind of evidence that's surfaced in the last, I don't know, half decade or something like that. In particular, those videos that anybody can find, and many listeners will have seen on the internet, showing, gun sight video that was made by F-16 fighters, in the military, off the coast of Southern California, and that shows strange objects in there that are, rotating or moving and stuff like that. And of course, it was the question, well, what are these things? And of course, the military is going to get involved in that because, it's the military's job to know what's in our skies. So whether you think it's aliens or whether you think it's something else, and personally, I think it's something else, but whatever, they want to know. They definitely want to know. So it was surprising to me that there was some government investigation of these videos. And that's led to, I think, a kind of a resurgence in our interest in UFOs, because here they are, and doggone, the military's looking at them, and now NASA has been asked to look at them too. And there have been a couple of reports that have come out on that subject.
Do you think, though, that they're doing a best practice right now, like how they're going about looking at this, I should say, from NASA's perspective? Do you think that they could be doing something else and what that might be?
No, I think that they're doing a good job. Look, all I know about that committee is that I happen to know several people that are on the committee, and I know, what their behavior's like, their qualifications and so forth. And these are qualified people. But both of their reports have only devoted, I think, like one sentence in each report to the hypothesis that this may have something to do with aliens. And they say there's no evidence for that. And you sort of have to read between the lines. What does that mean? But, I really do think this. If there was any indication that these phenomena were due to extraterrestrial beings, you would have tens of thousands of scientists around the world working on it. I mean, it could be nothing more interesting, right? And the fact that they're not doing that should give you some indication that this evidence isn't very strong.
It's true, but they only have unclassified data that they're looking at. Will they be given the chance? Because, and this is a question I'm not even really sure about that. Will NASA even have the opportunity to look at classified information, knowing that they are, hopefully going to be reporting? They can't report that to civilians, but it is part of their mandate. So if they're not isn't it kind of redundant though? Or there makes no sense for them to do a report if they can't look at the classified information and analyze that data?
I think if the classified information, to begin with, you have to ask yourself, why would they classify it? Well, why? Have no idea. But okay, if it is classified, of course, the military can look at it, and NASA would be asked to look at it if the people that are looking at this thing think that there's anything that NASA could bring to the table. Is there any aspect of this phenomenon that NASA could better elucidate than, the military themselves? Listen, I worked for a military research lab years and years ago. It was a summer student kind of program, and the people are very competent. And actually, what we were doing was we were developing something that was actually a top secret device, but there was actually no secrecy. I mean, you could just give the plans for this to the public if you wanted to, and it wouldn't change the performance of this device. The device didn't depend on keeping some sort of secrecy. But look, I'll say again, I think that if there was good evidence that Earth was being visited, you'd have lots of people working on that problem.
Right. And we also have this communication aspect from NASA, and along with SETI too. Is NASA really just there then for when we do have some form of contact? And I hate to say this because they do so much other better work, like outside of just doing press conferences and making things look unbelievably amazing from a civilian media to civilian perspective. They're really unbelievable in what they do. But do you think that they're there maybe not to crunch the data, but to be there as a forward face organization that will be able to communicate this better to civilians and to understand it as we go along this process?
No, I actually don't think that. I mean, if that were true, then, when I worked for the military research organization, they would tell you something about. They say, by the way, don't tell anything. Don't tell anybody about what we're doing here. There was never any of that, actually. I mean, it was a very open sort of operation, as science is. Science is very open. And if there was good evidence, once again, that, aliens had come to a planet to do whatever they're going to do, to begin with, it wouldn't just be an American story, right? The Europeans would be interested too. Of course they would. I lived in Europe. I worked in Europe, and science is conducted there rather similarly to the way it's conducted in the U.S. But the public has this idea that there's some sort of great secrecy about the idea that Earth is being visited, and there isn't. So that's just, to me, it's conspiracy theory kind of thinking.
Okay. And this actually leads right into the David Grusch conversation, because when he first came out as a whistleblower speaking about this with News Nation, and we dropped a story with Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal as well in the debrief that broke this, your initial thoughts when it first came out, and did you actually have previous knowledge about David Grusch too before the
Not David Grusch.
story?
I know the other people that you've mentioned there. No, I didn't know David Grusch. He worked in some security operation for the government. Mind you, you shouldn't just say, oh, because of that, I'll believe everything he says. But I didn't know of him previously, no.
Yeah, what was your initial thoughts when he came out with this story?
Well, the thing that struck me the most, was when he said that there are federal government efforts to retrieve crash debris, that the government does this all the time, I think he said, in which they go to the site of an alien crash. Apparently the aliens are really good about interstellar travel, but they can't manage to do a landing. I think these aliens are, somebody ought to revoke their pilot's license. But in any case, when he said that the government routinely goes out and retrieves crash debris, I thought, what? Why am I only hearing this from this one guy? Yeah, I don't think they're doing that. Again, I think if they were doing that, you would know about it 20 different other ways.
Yeah, and we have so many different satellites that would be able to capture that data. Is there anything yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah, you're going to say?
No, but that's a really good point. There's something like, what is it? I don't know, 8,000, something like that, satellites that are orbiting the Earth that are still alive, if you will. They're still functioning. And most of those satellites are looking down. They're looking at things on the Earth, resource mapping or whatever, or Defense Department stuff. But, these things are not just American, of course. There's satellites up there from many different countries. And they're making very high resolution photos. If you go on Google Earth, right? I go on Google Earth and I can see my car in the driveway of my house, right? Okay, so obviously the resolution is, like a meter or something. They can see fairly fine detail. And those are the unclassified photos. So I'm sure that there are satellites that, can read the license plate on my car. Not that it's very interesting, but, really, it's a kind of a stretch of, it challenges my credulity to think that, with all this surveillance that, alien spacecraft routinely come into, or occasionally come into our airspace and then, crash in the desert. You would know that. You would know that from these satellites. You would see it.
Yeah. And what about privatized satellites, from private companies? Wouldn't they be able to track similar data? Maybe not to the full extent.
If there were visitors, that would really be a big story. And as I say, I think you'd have immediately thousands and thousands of scientists, trying to understand what's going on. And in fact, there's a fellow at Harvard, Avi Loeb, who's building equipment put on rooftops of buildings and so forth to scan the skies looking for anything that enters our airspace. So at the moment, he's still, busy building the equipment, but he has the money to do this. And, once this is deployed, or the equipment is deployed, then there'll be further surveillance of our airspace.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to see what Avi Loeb does more with the Galileo project in the coming years, because I know he was busy off at sea, looking into more interstellar objects that have potentially hit Earth, and has been, finding more information about that. But I hope he does go back to building those telescopes and getting more of that data.
Yeah, Project Galileo is the name of his project, and it is very definitely still underway.
Looking at David Grusch's claims then, what do you believe that this is? Do you think it's a disinformation campaign, or do you think that this is something else going on? Or is it somebody that has been told, these claims, who says he has a lot of evidence, and we're waiting to see that. We want to see it. But, what is this to you when you saw that? Like, what is this mechanism of? Yeah.
Well, this sounds like many other people that I've known and still know, I guess, who make similar claims that, Earth is being visited. The aliens are here. And, with Grusch, he was asked, well, can you give me an example of this? Okay, you say that the government is routinely retrieving crash debris. Can you give me a specific example that I can somehow check out? And he said, no, that's all classified. Well, that's, when I just throw up my hands, if you will, because, that's such an easy excuse. Oh, yes, this amazing thing is happening, but I can't tell you about it because it's classified. That's ridiculous, right? If it's really happening, there would be evidence all over the place. And, again, classifying it isn't what you'd want to do. You'd want to investigate it. You would want to involve scientists around the world.
So 2027 is a suggested date that when we will have contact with ET. Why is that date? Why is 2027 the date? And that's not too far away. That's really close.
When did
I said,
well,
or
who
is it
said
2037? Maybe I'm wrong. 2037. It says that they'll have contact of alien life.
Yeah, I don't know who said that. What I have said, because I'm often asked, when are we going to, finally find the aliens? And I said, look, if we don't find them in the next 10 years or 15 years, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. So I bet a lot of people a cup of coffee. But you can't say it's going to happen in 2027 or anything like that, because, it depends on the development of equipment, the money to pay people to operate the equipment and so forth. It depends on all sorts of things that you may know for this year, but you don't know for, 5 years down the road or whatever. So I don't know. Do you know where this 2027 date comes from?
Sorry, it's 2037 was the date that I
even so.
Yeah, 10, 12 years from now, something to that extent. I've seen that in multiple different articles that I've read. I've heard multiple different people within the science community make that turn, they say that statement, along with UFO folklore has come forward and said that too. So there's this weird, merge of that date from all different perspectives. And I always thought 2037, like what a specific date, it's almost like when people say something about prophecies, but 15
it's
years.
like it'd be like saying we're going to find the cure for cancer in the year 2033 or something like that. Sounds good, but I don't think anybody would dare to say that, because you don't know the exact date. All you know is that you're making progress, and on the basis of that, you can say maybe within 10 years we'll have the answer.
What technology right now is SETI using to contact ET? What's the most advanced tech that you're looking at?
Well, we do SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is in fact a listening experiment. We don't, try and start a conversation with ET, because in order to do that, you need to know where in the sky you should send the signal, right? And that means the first thing you have to do is just pick up some signal that they're broadcasting for whatever reason. It could be their television or their radar or something else. But once you pick that up, then you can localize it on the sky. You can figure out, that signal is coming from over there, and point to someplace on the sky. And at that point, if you want to, you could, broadcast a message, hi, we're the Earthlings, and we'd love to get in touch with you. That's controversial to some people in any case, but you first have to find them. So that's what SETI is about.
We've had multiple different signals. We've had two specifically that I know of. We have the WOW signal that happened in 1947 from the Big Ear, I believe it's called. The Big Ear telescope in Ohio. And then there was recently the beam of radio waves that came from Proxima Centauri. Can you talk a little bit about both of those? Because I remember hearing the WOW signal, and when I was a little girl growing up, my dad used to talk about it all the time, and he was like, "That's the first, contact with ET that we've ever had." And then now, we hear about these other communication devices or communication connections. Can you talk a little bit about them? Because it's obviously not a connection to ET. Then what are they?
Yeah, well, the first thing to keep in mind is that if you have a receiver that can pick up signals over a wide swath of the radio dial, and you connect that up to a big antenna, much as was done with the Big Ear radio antenna at Ohio State, lamentably now gone, turned into a golf course, but there it was, and they picked up the signal, and it had the characteristics of being a signal that was produced by a transmitter. In other words, it wasn't a natural signal from a quasar, pulsar, or any of these sort of natural radio emitters. It was a signal that had to be made by a transmitter, which means there had to be some body, some intelligence that built that transmitter. That was the implication. Now, what was it? It was never seen again, although many people have looked, including, by the way, the SETI Institute. We pointed our antennas at the same spot on the sky, but nobody's ever picked up anything else. It hasn't happened again. I asked years ago, I called up a buddy who works as a radio astronomer actually at Ohio State. And I said, well, what's your take on the WOW signal? You're the ones that picked it up. And he said, I think it was instrumental. In other words, it was an artifact produced by the equipment in Ohio, not equipment on a planet around Proxima Centauri. That's what he told me.
So human error?
Well, I wouldn't call it human error. Anybody who works in the field of radio astronomy knows that there's enormous interference. Our biggest problem when we do SETI, we have this antenna up here in Northern California, and we pointed at various star systems, and you pick up signals all the time. If you sit there for 5 minutes, you'll see, dozens of signals coming in, right? So picking up a signal is not the big deal. The big deal is, wait a minute, yeah, but is that signal coming from the sky? Or not from a satellite that we have in the sky, but is it coming from deep space? Or is that signal just, you're picking up your own equipment? And so far, we haven't found anything that was really coming from deep space.
If you can tell me, what has SETI recently discovered then when it comes to any form of communication or being able to listen to see what's going on within the cosmos?
Yeah, well, of course I can tell you. Once again, there's no secrecy in astronomy, actually, believe it or not. But we as I say, we pick up signals all the time, and you can try and track them down, try and figure out where they're coming from, but that's really a big job, and you would spend all your time doing that. It's much better to keep looking for, or at least we think it's much better, to keep looking for new signals and see if there's some signals that would pass a very simple test, and that is you're pointing at some particular direction in the sky, you pick up a signal, and now you just move your antenna so it's not pointing in that direction anymore, and see if you still see the signal. If it's obvious, if it's ET, the signal will go away when you're not pointing in the right direction. But if it's just interference due to radars and stuff like that here on Earth, then you'll continue to pick up the signal because that signal will be so strong relative to anything coming from deep space that you'll pick it up essentially anywhere you point the antenna. So, those kinds of tests are done every time you find a signal. And so far, they've all turned out to be terrestrial. Yes, we found intelligence, but it's human intelligence.
It's unfortunate, too.
Yeah, just to say, well, but you have to keep trying. I guess you could say Chris Columbus had to keep trying, but he did pretty well on his first voyage, so maybe that's not such a good analogy.
When you're about to make contact, and this is really hard to imagine because we don't know how it might happen, but are you feeling that it might be from a farther galaxy, close to us? Like, what has been the closest estimate that you have, that you personally think, maybe not what SETI has, but what you personally think, and how that contact will be made?
Well, you just have to say, okay, what are your assumptions about ET? And the assumptions we make is we just assume that ET is somewhat like us. In other words, it's a living organism, right? Which means it has to be on a planet which has, liquid water or liquid something, but probably water, maybe an atmosphere. Without an atmosphere, life would never have been able to come out of the oceans and that sort of thing. So we kind of make all these assumptions. It's got to be on a planet that has the right environments for life, and then you count on Darwinian evolution to produce intelligent life. So the question then is, well, how many planets like Earth are out there? And that's something that we couldn't even begin to answer before about 1995. But now we know that planets are very common. There are like 1 trillion planets in the Milky Way galaxy, and we can see a couple of 100 billion other galaxies, each with 1 trillion planets. So yeah, maybe Earth is kind of rare as a planet, but even if it's 1 in 1,000 or even 1 in 1,000,000, there's still plenty of Earths out there, right? So let's say you need a few 10,000 Earths to have a good chance to find ET. Well, that means you're not looking very far into space. Within a few dozen light years, or that number of planets. So ET could be relatively close, astronomically speaking.
Okay. And living in those habitable zones, potentially.
Well, by
Hopefully, if they are
definition, they're
like
in a
us. If
habitable zone. Yeah.
right, if they're like us. I always think that potentially they won't be. I always think that because we only know what is human in our own science and evolution, it might be hard for us to think potentially what might be another evolution because we only know what we know.
That's
And
true.
our science
No,
is
that's
only
true.
growing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the time though. I hope I'm alive. Hopefully in the
Well,
next decade should be. So
well, if you're not, Chrissy, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. It'll probably be not very interesting to you if you're not alive, but nonetheless.
so now say we have made contact. What are the step by steps then that SETI has going forward, giving this type of information or finding a signal or anything to that degree? What's the step by step protocol that you have?
Well, there is a protocol that was, in fact, hammered out in an international committee years ago. Actually, it was in the 1990s. But to begin with, let me say what the protocol is. It's very simple. There are only three things in there. And the first thing is, if you find a signal that looks like it's really extraterrestrial, check it out. Okay, that's just good science. But anyhow, that's the first step. The second thing is tell everybody, right? Okay. And we've had some false alarms which show that you don't even have to think about that one, because as soon as you find something, your phone starts ringing and the New York Times is on the other end. They want to write a story about this. So, of course, you're going to tell everybody. And there's no reason not to tell everybody, by the way. And the third thing is don't broadcast any replies without international consultation. Now, that's the only interesting one. And the question is, why is that in the protocols? And the answer is, well, it's just to make sure that one country doesn't monopolize the information. In other words, if Liechtenstein, finds a signal, right, that they don't keep that quiet, and they're the only ones that know where on the dial the signal is and where in the sky it is, that you just share the information. But again, that's just the way science works. So that's not very controversial either.
Yeah, and it's always funny when I look at politics and how so many different countries are at odds, but their space administrations work together. I say, why don't we take a cue from that, from our politics and political side? Because it makes sense that we share the information, so we all know it's not just one country that is in the know and trying to communicate than others. So I
Yeah.
respect that and appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's certainly the way SETI works. We have meetings all the time, but they're international.
Do you talk about internally and then maybe doing measurements around ontological shock and what that would mean? I imagine that there's been multiple conversations, but I've never seen a study released by SETI about what that would look like.
Yeah, well, there have been studies of that. I don't think anybody used the Greek word that you did, but what they do call this is, all right, what's the reaction to finding a signal? Right? What's a societal reaction? What do we do? How does that change humanity, or does it change humanity? And do we broadcast a reply and all that kind of stuff? So, but you can find volumes that document, what people have said at various meetings on the question of what happens if you actually pick up a signal. It's a very interesting question because, what happens to Mr. and Mrs. Front Porch, Joe Public? What is his reaction to that, right? And so, it's speculative, but a lot of things in SETI are speculative. But there has been a lot of work in that field, yes.
Yeah, and has it been specifically done by SETI, or just are you speaking of others in general?
Well, some of it has been done by the SETI Institute. We've organized such meetings in the past, but we're not the only ones. I mean, the International Association of Aeronautics and Astronautics has a SETI permanent study group, and they get together once a year, and they organize these kinds of sessions as well, meetings as well, where you're trying to figure out what are the societal implications of finding ET if we do that.
Yeah, I'd love to be in that meeting. It's a good one.
Well, let me assure you, they're not maybe as interesting as you may assume, but you can certainly read the proceedings even without going to the meetings. Trouble with going to the meetings is it's very expensive. Travel, hotel, registration, it's expensive. But you can read the results for free. So there you go.
There you go. And that's good for other people to know too, that they can look into it a little bit more if they have questions. So as an astronomer, we hear this talk of finding potential life in the Milky Way. What's your thoughts around that? We've seen a lot of information that has come forward. I believe there was I believe there was like a distant cloud that was suggested that it could emerge in our outer reaches of the solar system, within our Milky Way, that potentially could have had life or anything to that degree, and not in, and I say like in a human form, but maybe in some smaller form. What's your thoughts to that?
Well, that sounds like a novel by Fred Hoyle called the what is it, the Black Cloud, whatever it is. Look, there, I don't know, a couple of 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy. That's a big number. How many planets are there? Probably a trillion planets. Right? And most of those planets aren't going to be very interesting. They're going to be like Jupiter or Neptune or something like that. Not so interesting for life. But when you have a trillion planets, it's like buying a trillion lottery tickets. Most of them are going to be losers. But if you buy a trillion, some of them are going to be winners. And I think the same thing applies
Right.
here.
But what about our own Milky Way? The word, I believe it was phosphorus, was found within, it was a phosphorus in a distant cloud, suggests life could emerge in our outer reaches within the Milky
Well,
Way.
oh yeah. But nobody's saying we're not going to find intelligent life in our galaxy. We have to look at other galaxies. Some people will do that, but in general, you don't do that. You look in our galaxy, and not only in our galaxy, you look at the nearby star systems, because if you're looking at something that's far away in another galaxy, for example, the Andromeda galaxy, everybody's favorite other galaxy, it's 2 million light years away. That means the signal, is going to be really weak by the time it gets to us. Whereas if you look at the nearest 1,000 star systems or 10,000 star systems or million star systems, all those stars are going to be very close relatively. And consequently, the signals will be stronger. So from the research perspective, you don't worry about aliens in some other galaxy.
Right.
ET was from another galaxy, but that was a movie.
Right. Right. Fair enough. A great movie too. One of my favorites. But now, just what would be the distance if we had a signal that was just a normal, human-based Earth signal that came potentially from like Andromeda to us? How long would something like that take? If it's a radio signal, whatever it may be. I know those are very basic, but how long would it take in estimated
Well, if
time?
you really think it would be coming from Andromeda, as I say, Andromeda is already another galaxy, so that's far away.
Right.
The
Right.
the Andromeda galaxy is on the order of 2 million light years away, right? Is that right? Yeah, something like that. 2 million
Yeah.
light years, I think. So that means the signal's 2 million years old, but that doesn't really matter. It is the fact that what does matter is the fact that it will be much weaker than if it comes from a star system that's only 200 light years away instead of 2 million light years away. Okay, so that favors, as an experiment, it favors looking at nearby objects first, right? If you want to find life in space, you can say, okay, I'm going to book a flight to Mongolia and go look for life. You don't have to. You can just walk out the door and look in your front yard, right? So, that's kind of the situation here.
Right. Now, my last question to you. What is SETI currently working on that might be something that will be coming out in the near future that we all can be expecting?
Well, what SETI does is, there are various mundane things like, designing equipment and building equipment. I say mundane, they're not really all that mundane. They're actually quite interesting, but also fundraising, right? Because there's no government money here for the SETI Institute, SETI project. It's all privately sponsored. And so, of course, money is a perennial problem because you need to be able to pay the scientists and build the equipment and so forth. So those are things that, Joe Sixpack is not so interested in hearing about your fundraising efforts, but that's where a lot of effort has been expended in the past. At the moment, we're doing fairly well in terms of fundraising. So, people are thinking of, well, what's the next experiment? And the next experiments usually involve building new kinds of equipment because technology keeps moving forward. We're here in the Silicon Valley, every 2 years, your home computer becomes somewhat obsolete. And that's true for science experiments that use electronics, which includes SETI, of course. So we're always building new equipment that's more capable, that's able to look over more of the radio dial, that's able to find weaker signals, those sorts of things. So that's what SETI does, day to day. If we find a signal, of course, then it's a little more interesting for the public.
Right. And what about machine learning? I believe that's something that you would put into best practices coming up, and also to review old data. I've talked a lot about this on other podcasts too, such an AI fan, but I would imagine that would be a great place to be able to start with past data that you have, to be able to use AI to do that, and then along with, future data.
Well, we do use it now in terms of the real-time processing of signals coming into our antennas. We don't use it to look at old data because there is no old data. The antennas collect so much data per second that you can't afford to store it. You can't afford to buy thousands of hard drives to put all the data on to keep it, right? So in fact, everything is processed more or less real time. So the data that we took 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I mean, it's gone. We looked at it when it was coming in, but we don't keep it. We can't afford to keep it.
That's a shame, though, I would say, isn't it? That you
Well,
can't,
it is.
yeah.
It is. Yeah, no, you're right. But on the other hand, keep in mind that the equipment that we had 10 years ago was not as good as the equipment we have now. So because the equipment keeps getting better, the most interesting experiment is the one you're doing now, not the one you did 10 years ago.
That's true. That's very true. I know that I've spoken to other scientists that are using AI and just evaluating past information that might be related to space, and they've been able to find maybe anomalies in that. I forget her last name. It's Beatrice, who I've actually spoke with. She's looked at past information and past data and images to be able to find anomalies in space.
Yeah,
And
Beatrice Villaroyal.
right. Yeah, exactly. She's super lovely. Love what she's doing. But that's a great place for AI to start something like that. So I would imagine that the data you guys had would be something that could be analyzed too. And it's unfortunate. I'm always a fan of keeping that stuff no matter what.
Yeah, well, it's just a matter of, if you
Storage.
want to keep all the data, you don't have the money to collect new data.
Seth, thank you so much for being rebelliously curious with me today.
It's been my pleasure.